The rain drummed against the classroom windows of the Galactic Academy as Professor Krim clicked their 6 arms together in the traditional attention-getting gesture of the Hive Worlds. 23 students from across the galaxy sat in uncomfortable silence, knowing that today would bring the announcement of their final survival examination. The air recyclers hummed quietly while students shifted nervously in their specially designed seats, each crafted to accommodate different alien physiologies. Alex sat near the back, the only human in Advanced Survival Tactics 401. The desk felt too small, designed for species with different proportions, but Alex had grown used to such minor discomforts during the exchange program. Around the room, various species displayed their anxiety in different ways. The crystalline shardfolk student, named Quill, flickered with nervous blue light, while the aquatic depth swimmer called Wave kept their breathing apparatus bubbling faster than normal. The gaseous cloud dancer, who went by Drift, swirled in tight, worried spirals above their specialized containment chair. Professor Krim's compound eyes swept across the room before they began speaking in their translated mechanical voice. Your final examination will test everything you have learned about survival in hostile environments. You will spend 30 days on Verdania's forest moon, where the trees grow over 300 feet tall and the ground remains permanently flooded. Nervous murmurs rippled through the class. Verdania was notorious among survival instructors as one of the most challenging environments in known space. The massive trees created a complex ecosystem where different altitudes meant completely different worlds. The canopy level stayed dry and supported flying creatures, while the flooded forest floor teemed with aquatic life forms that could be either helpful or deadly. However, Professor Krim continued, raising one clawed arm for silence, this examination comes with special restrictions. You may use only primitive technology. The classroom erupted into protests. Quill's crystalline form flared bright yellow, with indignation. Primitive technology? How are we supposed to survive without proper equipment? Wave's breathing apparatus bubbled furiously. My people's bioengineering techniques require sophisticated cellular manipulation tools. Drift spun, faster, their gaseous form becoming agitated. Without atmospheric processors, I cannot properly regulate my density for different altitudes. Professor Krim waited for the complaints to die down before explaining. Primitive technology means no energy weapons, no gravity manipulators, no nanofabricators, and no digital computation devices. You may use basic metals, natural fibers, simple mechanical tools, fire, and any materials you can gather from the environment itself. Alex remained quiet while classmates continued their protests. The human had grown up camping with family, learning to build shelters from branches and rope, start fires without modern equipment, and find food in the wilderness. These restrictions sounded less like punishment and more like a return to basics. The moon's ecosystem presents unique challenges, Professor Krim explained, activating a holographic display. The forest floor floods during the 6-month wet season, which begins in 2 days. The only consistently dry areas exist in the canopy, between 150 and 300 feet above ground. Each of you will be assigned a different sector. The hologram showed the massive trees with their thick, interwoven branches creating natural platforms high above the water. Alex studied the display carefully, noting how the trees grew in clusters with spaces between them. The gaps looked manageable for someone comfortable with heights and rope work. Professor Krim began announcing sector assignments. Quill received the Crystal Grove, where mineral deposits in the trees would help their light-based abilities. Wave got the wetland interface, where the flooding connected to natural springs. Drift was assigned the wind channels, where natural air currents flowed between tree formations. Alex of Earth, Professor Krim's voice carried a slight tone that might have been amusement. You will take Sector 7, the Deep Canopy Zone. Several students turned to look at Alex with expressions ranging from sympathy to barely concealed satisfaction. Sector 7 was notorious among Academy survival courses. The trees grew so densely that sunlight barely reached the upper branches, let alone the flooded ground. The canopy formed multiple levels, creating a three-dimensional maze where getting lost meant certain death. Most challenging of all, the trees in that sector grew with unusual spacing, requiring significant skill to move between them safely. Each student must demonstrate not only survival, but adaptation to their assigned environment, Professor Krim continued. You will be monitored remotely, but no assistance will be provided unless you activate emergency beacons, which will result in automatic failure. Quill flickered nervously. What if we cannot build adequate shelter with such limited tools? Then you will learn the difference between wanting modern conveniences and needing them for survival, Professor Krim replied. Many species across the galaxy developed sophisticated civilizations using only these basic technologies. The exercise will teach you whether your people's advancement came from necessity or simply available resources. The professor began distributing equipment lists and sector maps. Alex received a basic kit containing rope, a metal knife, a small axe, fire-starting materials, and a water purification tablet supply. The map showed Sector 7 in detail, marking the major tree formations, known water sources, and dangerous areas to avoid. While other students complained about the limited supplies, Alex mentally cataloged possibilities. The rope could be supplemented with plant fibers. The trees would provide building materials. The knife and axe were quality tools that could accomplish most necessary tasks with skill and patience. Fire meant hot meals, water purification, and protection from hostile wildlife. You have 48 hours to prepare, Professor Krim announced. Study your sector maps, gather any additional primitive materials from Academy supplies, and make peace with whatever deities your species worship. Transport to Verdania departs at dawn the day after tomorrow. As students filed out, discussing their assignments with various levels of panic, Alex remained seated, studying the sector map in detail. The deep canopy zone looked challenging, but challenges could be opportunities for someone prepared to think creatively. The spacing between trees would require careful planning, but humans had been solving transportation problems with rope and wood for thousands of years. Other students saw primitive technology restrictions as a handicap. Alex saw them as tools waiting to be used cleverly. Sunlight filtered through layers of leaves as Alex stood on the transport platform, looking out at the endless canopy of Verdania's forest moon. The trees stretched beyond the horizon like a green ocean, their massive trunks disappearing into the mist below where floodwaters had already begun rising. The other students gathered their equipment nervously, some already activating emergency beacons before they had even left the landing zone. Transport Officer Reed, a gruff veteran from the Terran colonies, shook his head as 3 more students requested immediate evacuation. Every semester, same story. They talk big in the classroom, then reality hits and half of them want to go home before their boots touch dirt. Alex secured the equipment pack and checked the rope one final time. The Academy had provided 50 meters of quality synthetic cordage, but that would not be nearly enough for what the human had in mind. Fortunately, the forest moon offered abundant natural fiber sources for anyone who knew how to process them. The platform descended toward Sector 7, passing through different layers of the canopy ecosystem. At the highest level, bright sunlight supported flowering plants and active bird-like creatures. The middle canopy grew dimmer but remained lively with different species adapted to filtered light. As they dropped toward the deep canopy zone, shadows deepened and the air grew thick with humidity. Officer Reed guided the platform to a large branch nearly 200 feet above the floodwaters. This is as close as regulations allow me to get. Your sector spans about 2 square kilometers of some of the most challenging terrain on this moon. Most students who survive here do it by staying put and rationing supplies until extraction. Alex stepped onto the branch and immediately began assessing the environment. The tree felt solid underfoot, its bark providing good grip even in humid conditions. Similar massive trees grew within jumping distance, while others stood far enough apart to require rope bridges or climbing techniques to reach. The canopy above blocked most direct sunlight, but enough filtered light came through to support plant growth and navigation. "Any last-minute advice?" Officer Reed asked, preparing to depart. "Stay alive, stay smart, and remember that humans have been solving problems with sticks and string for thousands of years," Alex replied, already examining nearby vines for rope-making potential. The transport platform rose quickly, leaving Alex alone in the green twilight of the deep canopy zone. Most students would begin by finding or building a simple shelter on the nearest large branch, focusing on immediate survival needs like water collection and basic protection from weather. Alex had different plans. Moving carefully along the branch, Alex began mapping the local tree formations and taking mental notes about wind patterns, water flow from the branches above, and the structural characteristics of different tree species. Some trees had branches that grew in regular patterns, perfect for construction projects. Others showed signs of flexibility that would be important for building techniques that needed to move with wind and weather. The first priority was not shelter, but materials. Alex located several species of vine that could be processed into strong rope through traditional twisting and braiding techniques. The work was time-consuming, but essential. Using the metal knife, Alex began harvesting long sections of fibrous vines, setting them aside to dry partially before processing. While the vines dried, Alex explored the immediate area more thoroughly. The trees in Sector 7 grew in a rough grid pattern with natural spacing that suggested some form of intelligent design, though no known species had ever been recorded building in this area. The gaps between trees ranged from easy jumps to spans that would require rope bridges or careful climbing routes. 3 hours into the first day, Alex had identified the key structural elements needed for an ambitious construction project. Instead of building a simple shelter on one tree, the human planned to create a connected network of platforms spanning multiple trees. The design would distribute weight, provide backup routes if any single element failed, and create much more living space than conventional shelter approaches. The rope-making process began with splitting vines into individual fibers, testing their strength, and sorting them by quality. Higher-grade fibers would become load-bearing lines, while lesser-quality material could serve for lighter applications. The metal knife proved invaluable for processing materials, though Alex was careful to keep it sharp for more demanding tasks. Ahead. By evening of the first day, Alex had produced nearly 100 meters of serviceable rope from local materials, in addition to the Academy-supplied cordage. The human had also identified the 3 trees that would serve as primary anchor points for the first phase of construction. Each tree offered different advantages. One provided an excellent water collection area, another had branches positioned perfectly for multiple platform levels, and the third stood at the optimal point for expanding the network further into the sector. As darkness settled over the canopy, Alex built a small fire on a wide branch and prepared the first hot meal of the exercise. The simple combination of preserved food from the Academy kit and wild plants found during the day's exploration created a surprisingly satisfying dinner. More importantly, the fire provided light for continuing rope work after sunset. Other students were likely struggling with basic survival tasks, trying to stay warm and dry through their first night in challenging conditions. Alex spent the evening hours continuing material preparation and refining plans for the construction project that would begin tomorrow. The human understood that investing time in preparation and quality materials would pay dividends later when the real building work began. The deep canopy zone settled into its nighttime sounds around the small fire. Somewhere in the darkness, monitoring equipment recorded Alex's activities for Professor Krim's evaluation. The readings would show steady progress on an unusually ambitious project that other species would consider impossible with primitive technology restrictions. Morning mist drifted between the trees as Alex began the most challenging phase of the project. 10 days had passed since arriving in Sector 7, and what had started as an ambitious idea was becoming an impossible reality. The humans stood on a platform suspended 40 feet above the forest floor, connected to 3 different trees by a network of carefully engineered rope bridges and support systems. The construction defied every expectation about primitive technology limitations. Using only basic tools and materials gathered from the forest, Alex had created a pulley system that could lift heavy logs into position with mechanical advantage that multiplied human strength several times over. The design borrowed principles from ancient Earth construction techniques adapted for the 3-dimensional challenges of canopy building. Each platform served multiple functions according to a master plan that existed only in Alex's mind. The largest platform, built around the trunk of the primary anchor tree, functioned as both living quarters and workshop. A smaller platform, 20 feet away, served as kitchen and food storage, positioned to catch morning sunlight for cooking and drying preserved foods. The third platform, connected by a graceful rope bridge, provided water collection and purification systems that channeled rainwater through natural filtration materials. The engineering solutions impressed even Alex. Weight distribution calculations that would challenge modern computers were solved through intuitive understanding of physics and structural principles. The human had created expansion joints that allowed the entire network to flex with wind and weather, preventing stress concentrations that could cause catastrophic failure. Every connection point incorporated backup systems, so failure of any single element would not collapse the whole structure. Remote monitoring stations throughout Sector 7 recorded increasingly frantic data streams. The readings showed construction techniques that violated basic assumptions about what primitive technology could accomplish. Load-bearing calculations suggested impossible weight distributions. Structural integrity measurements indicated a network that should have collapsed days ago, yet continued growing stronger and more complex. Professor Krim reviewed daily reports with growing amazement and concern. The human student was not simply surviving the challenging environment, but transforming it into something entirely new. Other students struggled with basic shelter construction, while Alex built what could only be described as architectural innovation using Stone Age tools and medieval techniques. The most remarkable aspect was not the individual techniques, but how they combined into systems of increasing complexity. Alex had created workshop areas with specialized tools crafted from forest materials. A primitive but effective lathe, carved from hardwood and operated by foot power, produced uniform wooden components for more sophisticated construction elements. Cutting and shaping stations organized according to efficient workflow principles turned raw forest materials into precisely fitted building components. Water management throughout the growing village demonstrated engineering principles that most species required advanced technology to implement. Alex had designed collection surfaces that gathered rainwater from multiple levels of the canopy, channeling it through filtering systems made from sand, charcoal, and plant materials into storage containers woven from water-resistant fibers. The system provided more clean water than one person could use, with surplus directed toward fire safety and construction applications. The rope bridge network expanded daily as Alex identified new trees with useful characteristics. One tree provided excellent wind protection for a sleeping area. Another offered abundant food sources that could be harvested from a dedicated platform. A third tree had grown in such a way that its branches formed natural supports for a much larger construction project that was beginning to take shape. By day 15, Alex had completed what could only be called a small village, suspended in the canopy. Multiple platforms connected by rope bridges provided specialized areas for different activities. The sleeping area stayed dry and warm through ingenious ventilation and weather protection systems. The workshop area contained tools and materials for ongoing construction and maintenance. Food storage and preparation areas kept supplies organized and protected from both weather and forest creatures. the construction techniques drew from various human traditions adapted for canopy conditions. Lashing methods used by maritime cultures secured connections that could flex without failing. Architectural principles from mountain societies created structures that worked with natural forces rather than fighting them. Engineering solutions from desert peoples managed water resources with maximum efficiency. Most impressive was how the village integrated with the natural ecosystem rather than displacing it. Alex had designed platforms that provided nesting sites for local bird species, creating a mutually beneficial relationship where the birds helped control insect populations in exchange for safe breeding areas. Fruit trees within the village network were accessed through carefully planned harvesting platforms that allowed both human and animal use without conflict. The modular design meant each new platform could be added without disrupting existing systems. Alex had created expansion capabilities that could theoretically support a much larger population, with infrastructure already in place for additional water collection, waste management, and transportation routes throughout the Canopy network. Students began hearing rumors about remarkable construction happening in Sector 7. The monitoring reports filtered through Academy communications suggested that one student was not simply surviving, but building something unprecedented. However, the report seemed too extraordinary to believe. How could anyone accomplish such engineering feats using only primitive tools and natural materials? As the third week began, Alex started the most ambitious phase of the project. The village had grown large enough and sophisticated enough to support major construction work that would have challenged modern engineering teams. The human had proven that primitive technology was not a limitation, but simply a different approach to solving complex problems through creativity, mathematics, and determination. Strange sounds echoed through the forest as Quill activated their emergency beacon for the third time in 5 days. The crystalline being flickered with frustration and exhaustion as they huddled in a makeshift shelter that barely kept out the constant drizzle. 20 days into the survival exercise, most students were barely hanging on, counting hours until the mandatory 30-day period ended and they could return to civilized conditions. Wave's situation was even worse. The aquatic student had constructed a reasonable shelter near a water source, but their bioengineering techniques proved useless without proper cellular manipulation equipment. Food sources remained limited to basic gathering, and the depth swimmer was beginning to show signs of malnutrition despite their species' legendary adaptability. Drift had managed better than most, using their gaseous nature to explore widely and locate resources. However, the Cloud Dancer was struggling with the dense canopy environment, which restricted their natural movement patterns and made navigation increasingly difficult. The atmospheric currents that Drift relied on for orientation were chaotic and unpredictable in the complex tree formations. Then the rumors started. Transport Officer Reed, making his routine supply drop to emergency beacon locations, mentioned strange reports coming from Sector 7. The monitoring stations are picking up some unusual readings from your classmates' area. Sounds like they've got quite a construction project going on over there. Quill's crystalline form brightened with curiosity. What kind of construction project? Hard to say from the reports, Reed admitted. But the energy signatures suggest multiple fires burning simultaneously, which means either your human friend has completely lost control of their situation, or they've built something that requires multiple heat sources for different purposes. Wave's breathing apparatus bubbled with interest. Multiple heat sources would suggest sophisticated resource processing. That seems impossible with primitive technology restrictions. Reed shrugged and continued his supply drop routine. Impossible. Or not, the readings are consistent. Your human classmate is definitely up to something unusual in Sector 7. Over the following days, more details filtered through the student network. Other transport officers reported seeing smoke columns from unusual locations in the deep canopy zone, suggesting construction fires rather than emergency signals. Emergency monitoring systems detected no distress calls from Sector 7, despite recording activity levels that should have overwhelmed any single survivor. By day 25, curiosity overcame pride and exhaustion. Quill made the difficult journey towards Sector 7, using their crystalline light-focusing abilities to navigate through the darker regions of the Canopy. The trip took most of a day, requiring careful climbing and rope work to cross the gaps between tree formations. What Quill discovered challenged everything the Shard folk understood about primitive construction techniques. Alex's village had grown into a three-dimensional community that spanned nearly a dozen trees. Rope bridges connected multiple levels of platforms, creating transportation routes that allowed efficient movement throughout the vertical neighborhood. Specialized areas served different functions with engineering precision that would impress modern architects. The human was not alone. Local wildlife had integrated into the village design in ways that created mutual benefits for all species involved. Bird-like creatures nested in specially designed platform areas that provided protection in exchange for insect control and seed dispersal services. Small mammals used rope bridges as highways through the canopy, their movement patterns helping to maintain and strengthen the network connections. "This is incredible," Quill whispered, their crystalline form glowing with amazement as they observed the sophisticated water management systems. "How did you calculate the structural load distributions without computational assistance?" Alex looked up from a woodworking project and smiled. "Same way humans have been building things for thousands of years. You observe patterns, test ideas on small scales, and apply what you learn to bigger problems. The trees themselves show you how they distribute weight and handle stress loads." The human gave Quill a tour of the village, explaining the various systems and construction techniques. The Shard folk was particularly impressed by a workshop area where Alex had created specialized spaces for different types of material processing. Light-focusing mirrors made from polished metal directed sunlight for heating applications, while ventilation systems managed airflow for projects requiring temperature control. "Your people excel at interfacing with crystalline materials," Alex observed. "I've been trying to create better cutting tools, but my techniques are limited. Would you be interested in collaborating on some improvements to the workshop facilities?" Within hours, Quill was helping to design light-focusing systems that dramatically improved the village's manufacturing capabilities. The crystalline beings' natural abilities, combined with Alex's engineering knowledge, created workshop tools that neither species could have developed independently. Word spread quickly through the remaining student population. Wave arrived 2 days later, exhausted from the journey but desperate to see what everyone was talking about. The depth swimmer's reaction was even more dramatic than Quill's had been. "You've created a complete ecosystem integration," Wave observed, studying the water management systems with professional interest. "This isn't just construction, it's environmental design." Alex showed Wave how the village's water systems worked with natural rainfall patterns and tree biology to create sustainable resource flows. The human had designed collection and purification methods that actually improved local water quality, while meeting all residential needs. "My people's bioengineering techniques could enhance these systems significantly," Wave realized. "I could help develop biological filtration methods that would increase efficiency and create backup purification options." Soon, Wave was contributing specialized knowledge about biological systems, creating improvements to food preservation and waste processing that made the village more sustainable and hygienic. The aquatic students' expertise in biological processes complemented Alex's mechanical engineering skills perfectly. Drift arrived last, drawn by reports that seemed too incredible to believe. The gaseous cloud dancer's reaction was perhaps the most profound of all. Alex had designed wind management systems that worked with atmospheric currents rather than fighting them, creating microclimates throughout the village that could be adjusted for different purposes. "You understand air movement patterns better than most of my people," Drift observed with amazement. These ventilation systems are more sophisticated than anything we build with advanced technology. The human had studied wind patterns for weeks, learning how the forest canopy created different air currents at various times of day and weather conditions. The village design incorporated this knowledge into systems that provided cooling, heating, ventilation, and even power for simple mechanical devices. "I've been thinking about expansion possibilities," Alex mentioned casually. "With your understanding of atmospheric dynamics, we could probably build wind-powered systems that would make this place completely self-sufficient." By day 28, what had started as an individual survival exercise had become a collaborative community project. 4 different species were working together, each contributing specialized knowledge and abilities to create something none of them could have built independently. The village had become a demonstration of how different forms of intelligence could combine to solve complex problems. Professor Krim's shuttle approached Sector 7 with monitoring equipment recording data streams that seemed impossible according to established survival course parameters. 30 days had passed since the students were deployed to Verdania's forest moon, and extraction procedures should have found exhausted survivors grateful to return to civilized conditions. Instead, the readings suggested a thriving settlement with multiple inhabitants and complex infrastructure systems. The professor had reviewed daily reports with increasing disbelief as the human students project evolved from ambitious construction to unprecedented community development. Energy signatures indicated sophisticated manufacturing processes. Water management readings suggested engineering systems more complex than many modern installations. Most puzzling of all, biological integration sensors showed ecosystem enhancement rather than the environmental disruption typically associated with survival shelter construction. Other faculty members had suggested equipment malfunction or data corruption, but Professor Krim had personally verified all monitoring systems multiple times. The readings were accurate, which meant that one human student had accomplished something that challenged basic assumptions about primitive technology limitations and individual survival capabilities. The shuttle cleared the upper canopy and descended toward the deep canopy zone, where Professor Krim expected to find a simple survival shelter and one exhausted student ready for extraction. What the professor discovered redefined their understanding of human capabilities and survival course objectives. Alex's village had grown into a masterpiece of integrated community design that spanned 15 trees and 3 vertical levels of the forest canopy. Rope bridges connected platforms with different specialized functions, creating transportation networks that allowed efficient movement throughout the 3-dimensional neighborhood. Workshop areas, living spaces, storage facilities, and community gathering areas were distributed according to principles that maximized both individual privacy and group interaction. The human student stood on the central platform, no longer alone. Quill's crystalline form sparkled with health and contentment as they worked on light-focusing devices that improved the village's manufacturing capabilities. Wave moved between biological processing areas where their bioengineering expertise had created food preservation and water purification systems beyond anything Professor Krim had seen in primitive technology applications. Drift flowed through wind channeling corridors that managed atmospheric currents for heating, cooling, and mechanical power throughout the settlement. "Professor Krim," Alex called out, noticing the shuttle's arrival. "Welcome to our community. Would you like a tour of the facilities?" The professor landed on the central platform in stunned silence, trying to process what they were seeing. This was not a survival shelter. This was not even a simple village. This was a sophisticated community integration project that demonstrated engineering principles, social organization, and environmental design that would challenge modern architectural teams using advanced technology. How? Professor Krim finally managed to ask. "How did you accomplish this with primitive technology restrictions?" Alex smiled and gestured around the village. "You called it primitive technology. We call it foundational engineering. Every technique used here was developed by human cultures thousands of years ago. We didn't have tentacles for fine manipulation like your people, or bioengineering capabilities. like waves species, or atmospheric control like drifts kind. We had to think our way through problems using whatever materials were available. The professor began examining construction details more carefully. The rope and wood engineering showed mathematical precision in load distribution and stress management. Water collection and purification systems demonstrated understanding of physics and chemistry that most species required computational assistance to calculate. Workshop areas contained tools and manufacturing processes that created complex products from basic raw materials. The restriction was designed to limit technological advantages, Professor Krim observed. It was supposed to test survival instincts and basic resource management. It did test those things, Quill interjected, their crystalline form flickering with amusement. But Alex showed us that survival and resource management could be approached as engineering problems rather than simply endurance challenges. Wave's breathing apparatus bubbled with agreement. Human techniques for biological system integration are more sophisticated than our advanced bioengineering methods. They work with natural processes instead of trying to control them. Drift swirled in complex patterns that indicated deep satisfaction. The atmospheric management systems here are more effective than anything my people build with gravity manipulators and energy fields. Alex designed them by studying natural wind patterns and working with environmental forces. Professor Krim walked through the village, documenting systems and construction techniques that would revolutionize survival course instruction across the galaxy. The human had not overcome primitive technology restrictions through superior individual ability. Instead, Alex had demonstrated that humans did not consider these restrictions limiting because human cultures had spent millennia perfecting the art of creating complex solutions from simple materials. Every species in this class has biological advantages that humans lack, Alex explained as they continued the tour. But humans developed something different. We learned to solve problems through tool creation, mathematical reasoning, and social cooperation. What you call primitive technology, we call the foundation that everything else builds upon. The most remarkable discovery was how the village had integrated 4 different species with completely different physiological needs and cultural approaches to problem solving. Alex had designed modular systems that could be adapted for different requirements while maintaining overall community functionality. Each species contributed specialized knowledge that enhanced capabilities for everyone. This changes everything, Professor Krim admitted as they prepared to file their final evaluation report. The survival course was designed to test individual endurance under technological limitations. You transformed it into a demonstration of collaborative community development using foundational engineering principles. Alex nodded thoughtfully. Survival was never just about enduring harsh conditions. For humans, survival meant creating sustainable communities that could thrive in challenging environments. We learned early that cooperation and creative problem-solving were more important than individual strength or advanced tools. The professor's report would reshape academy curriculum and challenge basic assumptions about technological development. Across multiple species, the human had not just passed the survival course, but had redefined its objectives and demonstrated capabilities that would influence interspecies cooperation and engineering education for generations. As extraction procedures began for students who wanted to return to the academy, Professor Krim faced an unusual situation. 4 students requested permission to extend their stay and continue developing the village as an ongoing research project. The floating canopy community had become something more valuable than a survival exercise. It had become a demonstration of what different species could accomplish together when they combined their unique abilities with creative problem-solving approaches. The village would remain as a permanent research installation, studied by xenoarchitects, survival specialists, and community development experts from across the galaxy. And Alex had already started sketching plans for improvements that could be implemented during next semester's survival course, when new students would arrive to learn that primitive technology was not a limitation, but an opportunity for innovation.